What's up, guys? Welcome back to Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson. I'm Scott McNally. All of our programming is brought to you by TrueNutrition.com. You could use our code THINK for additional savings. Hit me up if you have any questions about any of their flavors, anything you want to do with their highly branched cyclic dextrin. They've got all sorts of different supplements. You can create all sorts of great combinations. I use them for all my workouts. If you're in Canada, check out supplementsource.ca. As I've mentioned before, I've seen pre-workouts there on closeout for like $15. I saw Carbolin for like $25 off. So if you need a deal, if you're in Canada, there's a great place to go to get supplements. Plus, they support our programming. So by shopping with them, you know you're supporting good people and you're getting good supplements too. And also, we're supported by Patreon, by you guys. Thank you guys very much for everything you do, all your contributions. I'm going to be doing just like a one-on-one with you guys, a live stream over at Patreon coming up pretty soon. So I'll be taking questions for that over there. So make sure if you're one of the Patreon members that you log in and you check on what's going on over there. Scott Stevenson, what's going on, man?
You remind me of something that was it's a John Meadows memory when John first started the Granite Supplements.
Yeah.
And we went out to California, flew me out to California to do some of the initial advertisements. And I had to have all the ingredients and the supplements memorized so I could spit off a little introduction to how it works and why we chose the doses, blah, blah, blah.
I remember that.
We went to we went to the factory where his supplements were being produced. And that's where Rich Piana's stuff was being made too as well.
Oh, no kidding.
It's funny because John was starting off and John it was a pretty large investment. And Rich Piana's stuff was like 30 times as big. It was like, here's John's, like a few pallets of, the first bottles. And like that whole half of the warehouse is Rich Piana's stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But the thing that you mentioned, the $25 off, and I remember, I forget the name that they gave to this area of the warehouse, but down in the basement, they had like all these leftover supplements from years now of companies that were like starting to start their own supplement line.
Yep.
And we just went down. It was like a museum of supplements that never were or
no
that
kidding.
Once were. Yeah. So it was so cool. We went down there and they were just everywhere. It's like, if you find something you want, just take it.
Holy crap.
Just grab it. Yeah. So like I got like there was like one like pre-workout that was like, I think it might have been like WTF. I think that's the first, like, that's just called it that. And there was like another one was called like Brain Blaster or some shit like that. It had like this cartoon guy with his eyes bugging out of his head.
That's amazing.
There was like all these hilarious supplement names, like they're looking for. It's like you almost would want to buy those supplements because the names. I think I'm just going to buy this just to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I have somewhere in one of my boxes that I haven't unpacked. I have a supplement that is probably 15 or 20 years old that actually had cannabidiol in it.
What is that?
And cannabinoids, like CBD. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's got CBD in it. This is long before like this came on the scene, and pot became legal.
Yeah.
And the name of this, it was to increase your appetite.
Oh.
And the name of the supplement was Black Hole.
Huh. No kidding.
You just want to eat so much, you're like a black hole. You're just engulfing everything.
That's crazy.
And I never even took it. I haven't even opened the bottle,
Well,
but
our topic today,
really cool.
though, our topic is like the opposite of the black hole. We have gotten asked a lot all the time now. I think one of the most popular buzz supplements out there right now, or drugs in bodybuilding, are the GLP-1 drugs. And we had a question, and actually this was from one of our Patreon people. He said, have you ever had a client use a GLP-1 agonist like semaglutide or liraglutide? I've never tried it personally, but sounds like it could be helpful for someone doing a hard push at the tail end of a diet. I know that Vigorous Steve has talked about this stuff a lot. I first heard about the GLP-1 drugs back in 2016. I did an interview with Colette Nelson, women's bodybuilder. She had done a whole show with me about microdosing insulin, and she said, but we have to get back together and do a show about a new topic because everybody in bodybuilding is going to freak out when they learn about these new blood sugar drugs that are actually going to help you lose fat. And she was talking about GLP-1 stuff. So We haven't really talked a lot about them on the show. It's not something that I've personally used. I've known people who have used them for medical purposes, including a client, and I've seen issues in some of those situations. But I wanted to bring it to you, and maybe we could talk just a little bit of science about what these drugs are, and maybe here's what my concern is too, is that a lot of times when something new comes out, everybody always sees all the positives for the first few years. And everybody's like, oh, this is the latest, greatest thing. And it's real easy to sweep under the rug the negatives. In fact, people get really upset if you start pointing the negatives out of something. They do. Yeah, of course. And until that drug or supplement has run its course down the road, and then people have a more balanced perspective. But I don't know. Right. Let's balance some perspectives today. That's my thought.
Yeah, and sometimes you just find like the test of time will tell you. There's so many supplements that have come and gone.
Absolutely.
We talked about a lot of the growth hormone releasing peptides.
Yeah.
Those were so big before, and now some people still use them. I think you can still find them. They're still selling.
Yeah, especially people who don't want to do something illegal. They feel that this is going to be a safer option legally.
Right, but if they were all that, then you'd hear guys that probably like they're using growth hormone for 6 weeks, and they do, which would make sense, actually do like 2 weeks or 4 weeks with those.
Yeah,
they have an organizational effect on the pituitary because they're stimulating the pituitary. Pituitary produces a number of different hormones, and those tend to help the pituitary organize itself. There's an organization to the cells that secrete the various hormones that come pituitary hormones. So it would make great sense if there's any issue with like growth hormone recovery, which I don't think there is, but it'd be sort of like doing kind of a PCT type of thing.
Right.
For growth hormone. But people aren't doing that, It just didn't happen. And there's a lot of truth that comes just from standing the test of time and the bro science, which I think of as experience through trial and error in practice, so to speak. You can think of bro science as when someone says this works and they just make up some bullshit scientific explanation.
Right.
That's not what I'm talking about. That's the worst sort of form of bro science. I'm talking about guys who've tried things out and it seems to work from experience, and they may not even know why, except that it's connected in some way to the scientific understanding that we have of how the drugs work or how the training application may work or what have you. So anyway, this is an interesting set of drugs. You've got so when our enteric nervous system it's just absolutely phenomenal. It's connected to our microbiome with the bacteria that are there, and that's an entirely sort of unknown universe. Potentially there's as many microorganisms in our microbiome as there are cells in our body. I believe even maybe more. Massive number of bacteria and these phage viruses, which are bacterial viruses. And our vagus nerve, there's vagal activity that is mediated through the enteric nervous system. And we've got, when you eat, for instance, you've got secretin that comes from the duodenum and cholecystokinin, and then these incretin hormones, which is glucagon-like peptide 1, and what's the vasoactive intestinal peptide? Is that the other one? Glucagon, what is it? I made a note here. Yeah, I forgot the other one's name all the time. Gastric inhibitory peptide, GIP. So what these basically do is they mediate the glucose signal that comes, or actually potentially fats too, but the case of the incretins, so the GLP-1 being one of those, you eat and your blood glucose goes up. And that will have an effect directly on the insulin that's released from your pancreas. But if you eat something, so you can test out that effect by infusing glucose into the blood. We getting questions or just comments? See you looking? Nothing?
No.
Oh, good. Okay. I see you looking over there. I'm like, oh, maybe we're getting some good comments.
No, my monitor is over here, so I try to look this way because this is where the camera is. But if I want to look at you, I'm actually over here.
Yeah, you can't just make your eyes go like that.
Not on most days.
That would be crazy. But when you do, film it because I like to see that actually can happen. So these are hormones that are released from our gut. Actually, they're gut hormones, and they modify the insulin release, and they also modify our sense of satiety and the activity in your gut for digesting the peristalsis and moving things through the gut. So it makes sense. Like we got a pretty big production going on. It happens all the time, of course, but you eat food and then you've got to digest the food. You've got to release the enzymes from the pancreas. You've got to release the pancreatic hormones. So you've got an enzymatic response. You got and then an endocrine response and an exogen response. And GLP-1 mediates all of that. So the medical application is for things like mainly diabetes, but other related things like PCOS and other disorders where you tend to have insulin insensitivity or insulin resistance. So you get a nice scenario where if you take a GLP-1 agonist, so it acts like GLP-1, normally you eat, you get distension, you get glucose that rises, and then you want to be able to control that. So the GLP-1 would be released to say, okay, hold on, we need more insulin, right? So we can get the nutrients out of the blood into the cells, adipose, muscle, what have you. And we also want to slow down the food. Let's say you have a massive you're eating as fast as you can. First thing you want to do is slow down the intake so it acts on your brain and says, okay, don't eat so much, reduce the appetite because we got plenty of food coming in. And also, let's slow down the movement there because we have to have time to absorb that stuff. If you just ate something and it just went all the way through, then you'd have some problems because you'd have a lot of undigested, unabsorbed food that would get into your large intestine, and that's where the bacteria have their way with it. So things like beans, which have undigested food that's undigested, that's why you get gas. People with lactose intolerance, if the lactose gets down there, they have an issue because the bacteria get on, and then you'd have diarrhea. So you want to modify and mediate how fast the food's moving through your system. So GLP-1 basically says, hey, we're full. Let's make the appropriate adjustments in transit time through the GI and insulin release from the pancreas. So here's the trick. This is why it's a cool drug, so to speak, is you use an agonist that mimics that action, and it slows movement through your GI and inhibits your appetite up in your brain. And because you have more stretch or a longer period of stretch, that in of itself means you're less hungry. So it makes might get a little more insulin release because of it. I don't know. I haven't looked into the science to see how it compares, like on an acute basis. If you get more insulin release, that would like send us back towards the insulin hypothesis about adiposity and what have you, that it's all about insulin, whether or not you have body fat or not. And there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that really in the long run, it's the amount of calories, etc. So you've got a nice, basically, drug that tells your brain and your system, your GI, that you've got more food in there than you actually do.
Yeah.
Is the easiest way to understand it. Tells the brain, okay, hey, hunger should go down. Satiety is going to come on earlier, meaning you don't get hungry again for your next meal. And you're going to have food that enters into your system at a slower rate. So you're basically going to reduce the glycemic index of your food as well. So it's a pretty nifty trick. If you want to throw that figure up that I sent you, we can kind of look at that. Make that. You don't need this. Yeah, my face isn't need for that. So this kind of shows what's in red there. Slows gastric emptying. That at the top in the middle of the brain is there, suppresses appetite. There's the amplifies. If I'm kind of going clockwise around the circle, amplifies glucose-dependent insulin release. It actually inhibits glucagon release too. So if you had low glucose, you'd have more glucagon. When glucose is gone, you release glucagon. So those are the main actions I've already talked about. So it's a pretty smart place to put in a drug if you want to reduce appetite and slow digestion. Basically, it's a snifty little trick into making at a very sort of principal point in appetite regulation and digestion, a sneaky little spot to stick a drug in there because it has a really primary action on on those two things, which dictate how hungry you get and what your eating behavior is going to be. So for a bodybuilder, this is kind of the question people are, I think, getting at this is you're dieting down and you're hunkering in, and your food focus is just like all you can think about is food.
Yeah.
Well, you're not going to be nearly as hungry. And there's probably a dose response mechanism to this.
Yeah.
These they're injected on a daily basis or a weekly basis, so they're pretty long acting. And I don't know the pharmacokinetics of them because I haven't had. These explanations are just from someone who could probably explain this maybe a little bit better than the average person because I'm a physiologist, and I have an understanding of how they work. But I've never tried them. I haven't had clients use them, but it's a pretty, it's going to have the same kind of effects in a way, totally different mechanisms. You can take that, pick that. Right. I think now if you want. That you get when you use some pathomimetics. So you use stims, like ephedrine.
Yeah. So
you think about digestion is parasympathetic, rest, repose, rest and digest. And sympathetic of your autonomic nervous system is escape, fight or flight, that sort of thing. It's the opposite. So when you take stimulants, you take things like ephedrine. We've talked about that. It was like 2 podcasts back now, I think. Clenbuterol, what have you. They would stimulate more activity. They free up. They cause lipolysis. They may have an impact on your metabolic rate as well, like synephrine does, et cetera, et cetera. And so those things are inhibiting your appetite, and they're causing more activity. And they're going to have an effect too probably on gastric emptying. I haven't seen that with the stims, but given how they work, it would make perfect sense that they do. So. Mechanism of action is going to differ a little bit because yohimbine is kind of an outlier there in the way that it acts. It can potentiate insulin release. So anyway, it's sort of a different way of kind of getting the same things to some degree. It doesn't have that impact on metabolism, except I did find one study that shows that one of the GLP-1 agonists, this may have been an experimental one, tend to cause the browning of white adipose tissue. So we may have mentioned this before. Like when you have brown adipose, this is that thermogenic brown fat.
Yeah, we did talk about that.
The holy grail. Yeah.
So it may change some of your fat to. I like that term, browning. The browning of white fat. Huh.
That's the term. Yeah, you've got white fat and kind of beige fat, what's sort of intermediate, and then the brown fat. And the brown fat responds to thermogenic drugs in general.
Yeah.
And it's highly innervated, highly vascularized, integrated by the sympathetic nervous system. A lot of mitochondria, so it's there. It's a thing that you tend to have more of in people who are leaner, as opposed to those who are obese. That's one potential player in why someone might have a genetic propensity for obesity, is they don't have a lot of brown fat.
Okay,
but it tends to cause this GLP-1 tends to cause. At least in this rodent study that I found, an increase or shifts the white fat to brown fat. So maybe even shifting, literally body composition as well. And I think probably a direct fashion. I don't know. I didn't read that far enough. You sent this to me this morning. I'm like, oh shit, I forgot to look into that. So there's evidence out there to that effect. So that's the good, as far as I can see. That
sounds freaking shit, right? That all sounds great, actually.
That does. Yeah. Except you can go on the FDA and look on drugs.com and you see pretty universally for those drugs, for these GLP-1 agonists, and then there's also a deep, I think it was in that picture that we had up a bit ago, the figure. There's the DPP-1 enzyme inhibitors, and those just, it mentions that DPP-4, sorry. There's enzyme inhibitors that can be given that will reduce the breakdown of GLP-1, so it prolongs the half-life and increases their activity. And those also have this negative effect. One of the things that's going on here is you're stimulating the pancreas. So the you're increasing the stimulus, the GLP-1, by agonizing its receptor at the pancreas and increasing pancreatic insulin release. So pancreatitis is a potential issue there. And you don't want to have an upset pancreas. That can cause all sorts of issues. Then you get digestive issues, and then you can be kind of screwed. That could be pretty diabolical for someone who's, let's say they're 8 weeks out, and they're like, fuck it, I'm just gonna start taking one of these GLP-1 agonists.
Yeah.
And they develop pancreatitis like 2 weeks out from their show. and then you're not a happy camper. You're not digesting anything very well. Pancreatitis for the most part. And there's also a risk of C-cell cancer. It's a type of thyroid cancer. So that's a possibility too. So, and also, at least with those enzyme inhibitors, you can get joint pain. So the enzyme inhibitor is a daily pill, but it can cause some pretty bad joint pain. Don't know the mechanism. Just one of those commonly reported side effects. Yeah. So that doesn't help either if you're trying to train hard. So the devil wants to have its due with these. You can end up like you're constantly messing around. That's the cool thing. You're messing around with a pivotal point in regulation of digestive system and your sense of satiety. Yeah. Which is good. It's a powerful lever to pull, but it's also a powerful lever to pull. So it's going to have potentially powerful side effects depending on the person. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess just like with anything, I'm sure dose, duration, those are going to be, be factors. And since I haven't used these things with an athlete before, I couldn't comment on that. But that would be, as a coach, as an experienced person, just period in bodybuilding, I would say that would be my first thought is, using the least amount you could to get that result that you wanted, I guess. Just like with everything, if you're doing like a once a week injection, that's nice. That's super convenient, right? I don't know what the pharmacokinetics look. Does it you get a spike and then like we know we got this example like, hey, your TRT should be 1 mil of testosterone once a week. Right. It's like that's just horrible. You're so like you did it at the wrong time. Let's say I'll just do it on Monday, so I remember for beginning of the week. Yeah. And then the weekend comes around. That'd be the worst time to have a hunger rebound come at you. Yeah. I don't know if that happens. So that's the dosing protocol. A lot of times dosing protocols there's various reasons why you might have them, but sometimes the drug that you can just take once and it works for months or weeks on end is the one that most people want to do because they don't have to worry about it. Adherence to drug protocols is a huge issue. Yeah. Just like with exercise, any like human like health behavior, trying to get people to follow protocols that will improve their health, drugs or exercise or whatever it may be, prostate screening, mammograms, all those sorts of things. Adherence is just a huge issue. Yeah. So the downside to that, like if you do a daily once a day pill is okay because it's a daily thing. But if you've got something that you inject and it lasts for a whole week, that's imagine a toxin. Let's just say it's something that's literally poison that has a half-life on the order of a week. Oh yeah. Like that toxin will take you out because it hangs around. That means there's something about that toxin that in that case, if it's a naturally occurring toxin that animal or that plant that produces that toxin has evolved such that it just hangs around. It takes you out. Like your human system can't break that shit down. Yeah. Because it has a half-life of a week. Like our liver is like we got all these P450 enzymes we talked about last time, I think a little bit. Mm-hmm. It's like we can handle all sorts of stuff, but this drug has been engineered so that it will last for a week. Wow.
Yeah. You got to be really careful. I mean, I think everybody in bodybuilding gets that though, because we all use long acting testosterone. You know what I mean? Like we know everybody who's been around, they've had a shot of Deca. We know what those long acting drugs can do, that it's a commitment. Like once you take it, you are committed. So, and Billy Ryan had mentioned, and I wasn't sure which was which. I couldn't remember offhand, but he said, from my understanding, semaglutide is a once a week injection and liraglutide is injected almost daily. So, and I remembered, there's one that was always almost like on a daily basis. So, I would think that would be the easier one to control then, if you were taking just like Tren-Ace versus Tren-E,
Yeah. You've got that, potential. Like, why is it hang around for a week? Yeah. It's like, how do they modify that? Why is it working? And if you are someone, let's say you start to develop pancreatitis and it's related to the doses, the drug dose. I'm sorry, I'm saying German words sometimes every once in a while. Excuse me.
Dosis.
It's related to dosis is the word for dose in German. It's really, I said it like an American would. It's related to the dose or the peak blood levels. It might be, let's say you do your injection on Monday and it peaks, Monday night or the next day. and then you start to develop these pancreatitis symptoms. It's in your system for the next week. Like, then it's just going to get worse. Like, you triggered it, and then you're gone. So you start that 4 weeks out. I don't know how fast these things come on. I'm being I'm trying to toss out potential caution so people know maybe what to look for if they happen to make the decision to use these.
Yeah.
So you lose that ability to get it out of your system. It's like a woman who's using androgens, and she's going to use DECA, let's say.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I was kind of saying.
Make more sense. Yeah. For guys, no big deal, but for women, it's like, oh shit, I just didn't actually use double the dose, and it's going to be around for a month, and I'm going to just watch all the side effects accumulate, and there's nothing I can do about it. All right. In there, and I can get it out.
Well, listen, let's knock out a couple of these listener questions while I got you here. Right. Bailey Ryan has said, I know this is typically a skip question, but are there any potential deleterious effects from using melanotan 2? I'm white as Casper and have considered utilizing it.
Yeah, I mean, Ken talked about melanotan and his hematocrit. That was his experience. And I remember looking into that. I dug in, and I found something in a rodent study that backed up what he had seen as far as elevating hematocrit. And I've got another buddy who's a bodybuilder who's kind of substantiated that that's a possibility. I think you mentioned too, and now that I think about it, like there's potential for cancer pretty much every drug, right? Melanotan 2 was actually developed as an anti-cancer drug, for skin cancer.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what the issue was, why it never quite made it to market.
I thought you had said something a while back, and this was, it was a New Year's Eve episode of Blood, Sweat, and Gear, and you came on and hung out with us, and you had shared, I thought it was something related to cancer. Maybe we should look into that one and consider, getting back to it. But, definitely the hematocrit thing. I've heard that for sure. I haven't, let me put it this way. I hadn't attributed high hematocrit to melanotan 2 when I used it, but hey, you never know. And I will say this too, that I think that if you go by the old posts on the message boards, the dosing that was suggested back then, I don't know how it relates to now, but I think you can get away with far, far less than what it used to be dosed at. I would say and it's a drug that you can see the results. So I would say use the tiniest amount you can in micrograms. Not like we used to do a milligram every day to start and load, quote unquote.
A lot.
Yeah. And I would say try to get away with much, much less. Like, hey, try 100 micrograms a day and see how that works. And once you get there, maybe just 100 micrograms or 250 micrograms twice a week, or once a week. I think you can maintain it. The problem, here's another problem I see with it. People lose sight of how dark they actually get. It happened to me. I've seen it happen to a lot of people. I don't, in fact, and I would say it to Skip's face, like if we were talking, I don't think Skip actually recognizes how dark he really is. Like he's really dark. He's as dark as you can get. And I will tell you too, when I used it real intense, my skin was never the same since then. I used to burn real easily, and now I'll tan. Like it's had a lasting effect. I'll tan more quickly than I did in the past. So
I think that happens too. Yeah, I mean, people will get freckles and moles.
Yeah, you got to watch for that.
And so, this is where, like, maybe this is the reason I have to look into, have to probably find the studies that were done, the clinical studies, en route to being available as a drug. But the browning of the skin is going to help with the potential carcinogenic effects of UV radiation. That's what, like melanin does. Basically, your skin's brown because the light's being collected by the brown pigment. That's good. But if you're turning on the melanocytes and they're producing moles, and you've got someone who's, let's say, like, oh, I'm on melanotan, I can go out in the sun, do whatever I want. Like, I'm invincible here. I'm like Superman. I'll just get browner. You may be stimulating. You may have the possibility that you get one of those moles that turns into a skin cancer, melanoma or something like that. You get interaction there. But I do think it does work that way. that it has a kind of a permanent, kind of maybe even a reset of the activity of the melanocytes, or just the level of brownness that you have. It's a tough call, because, you know, I think, like, this is just me personally. Like, if you know that you, like, let's say you've gotten on stage, you know, say it's Billy. He's white as Casper. He's gotten on stage and he's done everything he possibly can to get his color right. He's tried Jantana. He's tried Protan. He's like tried liquid sun rays.
Right.
He's tried Dream Tan. He's tried combining them all, and like every time he turns green, it looks like the Purple Hulk. You know, like never friggin' works. But if he gets a little bit of a base tan, he thinks he can get it right. And does he go and like go to a tanning salon for like 8 weeks, you know, and work his way up to, you know, to that, or does he start on melanotan and not actually there's a synergy between melanotan and tanning too.
Absolutely. I would definitely combine the two. If you're going to use melanotan, you definitely combine them. Yeah.
So, you know, if you were to add that in and thinking just purely, and I have no data to base this on, it's just sort of if someone's like, you know, I burn every time I get brown, and they've literally, you know, dropped the ball on their stage presentation, then it might make sense to throw some melanotan in there.
Yeah.
You know,
I will say,
get a base tan.
I will say that nowadays with like liquid sun rays, I really think there is no need to actually tan anymore. You know, it used to be that we had to use Protan and get 5 coats on you by the time you got to the show. And nowadays with the thick spray tans, I think they have the color good enough that you don't need to have the base tan like you once did. You might at worst need a 3rd coat, but everybody spray tans now. They'll take care of you. If you're too light, they'll fix that for you at the show. That would be my thought.
This was Ken asked about this in the group, I think, in the Think Big group, about doing your tan. I did my own tan the last couple of years I was on stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used liquid sun rays. It literally cost me like
That's right. We talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah. It was awesome. It was awesome. I saved like hours of time, hundreds of dollars of money, and it looked just as good. The only thing was I had to pay backstage for oil.
There's pros and cons, I think, you know, it's a different conversation, and it would be a good one to have. But I do think we did have it actually. It's been a while, but there's pros and cons, you know, I guess I could get into it, but we're trying to get through these. So, hey guys, I'm going to take a brief pause to shout out our advertisers. I'm going to try to make this quick, but keep in mind they're responsible for helping us to put these shows out. If you guys want to support our programming, of course you can do so through Patreon, and thank you to everybody who supports the show through Patreon. I will have links to that below, as well as to all of our advertisers. If you shop with our advertisers, you'll get great products that I stand behind, and you'll also be supporting our programming. First of all, check out TrueNutrition.com if you're in the US. I use their hydrolyzed beef collagen every day, and I use their citrulline malate, beta-alanine, and EAA on days that I train. They have high-quality protein powders and tons of flavors. Hit me up if you have any questions. Use our code THINK over there. You'll get some additional savings, plus you'll support our programming, and you'll get some high-quality, third-party tested supplements. If you're in Canada, check out supplementsource.ca. They have blowout deals on top name brand supplements. They constantly have different things happening, so be sure to go to their site and check them out. I recently saw Carbolin for like $30 off. I mean, you really can't beat those prices. Plus, they have free shipping over $99. If you're in the UK, then you probably already know about Strom Sports. They're one of the leader in health supplements in the United Kingdom. Strom Sports Nutrition has standalone supplements like NAC and Tutka, and they have finished blends like Support Max, a high-quality, well-priced on-cycle support stack. I have links below to everything. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your support. There was another one, Scott, that I think would be perfectly suited from Reza. He says, hi guys, my question is, how would you go about training for the muscle to increase in muscle fiber size versus muscle fiber amount?
So this is the old hyperplasia versus hypertrophy scenario. So everyone says, "Oh, growth hormone, you know, that's going to cause hyperplasia." We talked about that. This was a couple of weeks ago. We went into this, and I showed some of the evidence suggesting that in the McDougall study that, you know, you've got these bodybuilders who have arms that are like 3.5 inches bigger, and their fibers are the same size. So, like, did they start off with itsy bitsy fibers and just spend, you know, all these years of training making them the same size as the as the guys who just trained for 6 months, or just part of their growth because they have more fibers. It's hard to say. Like see, here's why this is tough. First of all, people just say hypertrophy when they're referring to muscle growth.
Sure.
So we've lost sensitivity to that, what that term actually means. This is like my little I don't know, it's my little kind of quirk that I have, my little thing that kind of bugs me a little bit, because hyperplasia means increase in cell size, hypertrophy means increase in cell size, and muscle growth can come from hypertrophy or from hyperplasia potentially, or a combination thereof. So you measure whole muscle size. The changes that you see there, typically, if you also were to measure fiber size, are much less, because the whole muscle is not entirely fiber. So if the fibers make up X percentage and they double in size, it'd go up 50% in size, you might see an increase in whole muscle size of 25%. And that doesn't even seem to match always. So it's very, very interesting. What probably is happening when you get there's a couple different mechanisms that have been, there's evidence just from having seen what seems to be a transitional period, in whereby you go from one fiber, where you have fibers either splitting or new fibers forming, both of which would lead to hyperplasia, an increase in the number of fibers. So there are images where you see little fibers that are literally like splitting off into a Y. So you have like two fibers like coming from one. And there's also evidence from muscle biopsies where you have small fibers that are much shorter in length than the fibers that are surrounding them, that seem like they may be new fibers. When muscle fibers grow, hypertrophy, satellite cells are involved for the most part. Like, this is kind of a little bit of a controversy thing. I always have to say that, but you see, for instance, in those people who grow the best, that they have higher satellite cell density in their muscles, and they increase their satellite cell density more so than those people who are kind of moderate responders or non-responders. Just talked about this on Thursday in a webinar I gave in German. They also have an accentuated growth factor response. MGF and myogenin, for instance, is higher. So the satellite cell activity is greater there. So when muscle cells get bigger, just like the city that's enlarging, you need more post offices to service the city. You got a muscle cell that's enlarging, you need more nuclei to service the city. And those nuclei come from the satellite cells. The satellite cells get turned on by the growth factors, which are triggered by the stimulus of the weight training, the injury that is involved there. And satellite cells are really, when there's an injury to the muscle, they're like, they could do crush studies. They crush injuries. They literally take a muscle and they crush it. And then satellite cell activity goes sky high to repair the muscle. So they're part of repair. So a muscle cell gets bigger, and those satellite cells donate nuclei. And then the cells get bigger, and that's hypertrophy. But another way that you could potentially have muscle growth is you have more functional muscle cells, muscle fiber. A muscle fiber is a muscle cell. And that could be from satellite cells that some of them would sort of fuse together, or in the process of proliferating and differentiating themselves, form a whole new fiber. So the stimulus could cause them to donate nuclei to fibers so those fibers can grow, or the stimulus could cause them to proliferate to such extent that they end up forming a new fiber. And that's a pretty accentuated process too. So the question is, like, how can you turn on one versus the other? So the evidence we have for hyperplasia is these indirect evidence I just mentioned, things you see when you have biopsies, or things you see when you look at the larger muscles that have fibers that seem like they're smaller. There's that very, very cool quail study that Jose Antonio did where they progressively stretch overload model, where they hang a weight off the quail's wing. And the quail muscle got bigger and bigger and bigger throughout the month of this progressive overload protocol. And the fibers initially got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the muscle kept on getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the fibers started getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah, okay.
So fiber size went up, and then fiber size started going down as the muscle was getting larger and larger. So over the long haul, what happened was, in this particular study, and to take this and say, well, this is what happens with resistance training, is a huge leap. But if we look at that that phenomenon there, it suggests that long-term training, like we saw in the subjects in the McDougall study, may be something which is required before some of the growth process becomes less hypertrophic and more so hyperplastic in nature.
Interesting.
And that would make sense because, and I'm going to just spitball something here. So a lot of the bodybuilders, a lot of the best bodybuilders, and back when those studies were being done, people were training the way Arnold does. Everyone was doing high volume stuff. Not everyone's. Mike Mentzer was around at that time too. But there's an issue with fibers just becoming like just gigantic, because you have to be able to have a diffusion distance so you can get energy to those myofibrils that are on the core of the muscle fiber. So your mitochondria are typically going to be outside. You've got the myofibrils that are producing the force in there, and you've got to get ATP to the myosin, so the myosin ATPase, so you can have cross-bridge cycling. You can have the force production.
Yeah.
And that's a long haul if you have a gigantic muscle cell. It's just giant. There's a creatine phosphokinase system that does that. Creatine phosphate's much smaller than ATP, so it's real zippy. It diffuses more rapidly, so it can get there. But eventually you get to the point where if you've got a muscle that is, you've got a stimulus that where it would be advantageous to have more muscle mass. So you want a larger muscle, and you also have a stimulus that is highly energetically demanding. So something like, you're not just doing 2 sets, Mike Mentzer style, you're doing 15, 20, 25 sets. If you get this muscle fiber that gets so big that it has a diffusion issue, that doesn't help you with performance. You can't get energy to the myofibrils, and then you've got a muscle cell where you've got energy on the periphery near where the mitochondria are, and a lot of glycogen is going to be throughout too, but you've got potentially an issue where you've got energy availability in the center is, especially when you're using this creatine phospho, shuttle it's called, energy availability in the center is horrible because the muscle fiber is just ginormous, and it's great on the outside. Then you've got force irregularities.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So you don't want that to happen. It would be like having like a 4x4 truck where you've got, like the length of some part of the 4x4 mechanism is longer on one wheel than the other. So the wheels like spin at different speeds, and it'd be like, that would just be a wreck for your suspension.
So you'd be better off then it may start shifting, is what you're saying, than the type of growth.
Exactly. So the option then is, like, just as we saw in the quail study, the option is then, well, we still need more muscle mass.
Yeah.
We've got a muscle growth stimulus here, but we can effectively create that by having more muscle cells, having hyperplasia, and that way we don't have that diffusion distance issue. We sort of optimize the diffusion distance, a more normal muscle cell size, and we can get more muscle mass by having more cells. So the thing that might lead to more hyperplasia over the long haul, again, this is a total spitball thing. Like, you'd have to do a really long study probably to see this.
Yeah.
And measuring hyperplasia, this is the hard thing. You see this in animal models. You see it in rats. You see it in cats. You see it in quail. Hyperplasia happens. Like, the cats thing, like, there's a guy named Gagne who trained cats to do wrist flexion, trained them for like a year, and they saw like an 11% increase in the fiber number when some poor graduate student had to peel the fibers off, count them one by one. And when you take rodents and do that compensatory hypertrophy model, you pull out the soleus and you let the gastroc grow, you'll see in that case some hyperplasia. Those are like, that's a 1-year study, and you're counting every fiber. So it's like, okay, we're gonna train your chest, or we're going to train one bicep one way and one bicep the other way, and then we're going to take your biceps out. It's like, no, you're not.
Right.
That's the only way to know, really. Or take a biopsy and make those indirect kind of guesstimates, like when they compare the 6 months trained versus the elite bodybuilders. So the bottom line there is that over the long haul, someone who trains perhaps with high volume, or includes sort of a high volume, more metabolically stressful type of training, may be sending a signal that says, okay, let's get bigger. And we know that high rep sets can make, at least on the short term, high rep sets can cause muscle growth, as well as lower rep sets with heavier weight. having that component at least, or training that way, may give you the possibility that the signal is sent to create more muscle mass by creating more fibers, because the diffusion distance issue is something that is probably being sensed. And my guess, just knowing generally what I know about muscle biology, is that muscles are they're bioenergetic machines. The heart is like its own little thing, but muscles are badasses.
So the answer,
the plasticity there is really, really cool. So yes.
To answer his question though, can you pick one or the other? Hypertrophy versus hyperplasia?
You want probably both. You want to get the cells as large as they can be, and then get as much muscle mass by having as many cells as possible.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, I could probably create some system and like put together some, this scientifically linked logic that says you should train heavy for, one cycle, the heavy light hypertrophy hyperplasia system. By Dr. Scott, some bullshit like that.
Multiply your fibers and then grow them all.
Yes. Yeah. The fiber multiplication phase, and the fiber growth phase, and blah, blah, blah. You could even throw drugs in there, like use some IGF-1, whatever. But it's hard to know. And there's probably genetics that are involved with the extent to which that happens. There's people
I would
that
think
just
so.
Don't grow.
Yeah.
And there's some people that just grow crazy. Like I've said before, you have to keep this all kind of in context too. You've got building a larger muscle cell is a huge overhaul. Producing more muscle cells is a ginormous overhaul, because you've got a very tumultuous environment there in the muscle. It's not like it's an organ that just kind of sits there and does its thing, And let's say, like fat cells, they're like the forces that you produce in your muscle when you train are tremendous. Imagine if you wanted like fat cells are going to multiply, and you squeezed them like 100 times a day, 3 times a week, like as hard as you could. That would be severely disruptive to the tissue, whatever processes are going on there. So it might be having some rest and some recovery is going to be important, just of course for muscle hypertrophy. We talked about that before, but even more paramount for hyperplasia to happen. And this is where it's interesting. This is just kind of occurring to me like right now as we say this, is that the pro split or the bro split, where you train once a week, would make a lot of sense if you respond to that first and foremost to grow that way, because it gives you a whole week. Let's say you've trained and you've trained in a way that sets into motion. You've got enough size in those cells, so the growth adaptation now is set into motion, whereby it would be hyperplastic in nature, right? So now you need time to let that muscle rest, probably as much as possible, because if it's going to be hyperplasia, you're actually going to be forming new muscle cells, and that's a whole new deal. Yeah, like that's not just putting a new post office in a muscle fiber, like adding a new nucleus. That's like building a whole new subdivision, which is going to have its own post offices. So that's a whole other thing. So training frequently might not effectively bring that about. I don't know. I don't know what, the muscle is super resilient too. Like we don't get the same rapidity of growth with weight training that you do in some of these other models. Yeah. It pales in comparison compared to what you see with the overload, stretch overload, and the compensatory overload, and the cat. The cat training was about normal rates of growth, but some of those models where we see the satellite cell growth, the hyperplasia, those happen really, really rapidly. Yeah. So I don't know. I wouldn't worry about it. I tell you what, if you get to where you're bench pressing 405 pounds and you're pulling 600 off the floor, if you're using those exercises, get to where you're just beastly strong, or you can just do crazy shit with heavy weight for high reps. Yeah. You're going to be a pretty damn big dude, And
who cares how many fibers there are or how big they are at that point, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I wish I could answer that question. That would mean like that idea of like periodizing your training to affect different forms of muscle growth would be great. And the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy thing too it's just being like perpetuated now as something that happens. I've got a book here. It's across the way. It's in German. I just got it in the mail. Ordered it from Germany. It's on hypertrophy training. Okay. I got it just because it'd be interesting to read. I'm going to learn something for sure. And also I'm going to be able to learn some German vocabulary while I'm at it too. It's a good thing for me to read some scientific stuff in German. But they mentioned the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, and it's in that study, the Cody Hahn study, where it had the best evidence that we have so far that can happen. They took subjects from a study where the average muscle growth was nil. About half the subjects were distributed to where they actually lost muscle size, and the other half gained muscle size. So they took the samples from the subjects who gained muscle size, and then looked at what happened there, and that's where they found evidence of sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. But that doesn't that was a cherry picked sample. It makes sense. If you want to find evidence of sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, you have to have hypertrophy first and foremost.
Sure.
But to say that stimulus, the way they trained, would produce unequivocally sarcoplasmic hypertrophy would not be a true statement, because that stimulus did not produce hypertrophy on the average. For some people it did, and some people it didn't. So for those who grow from that stimulus, there was some sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. But that doesn't mean it happens universally. Just like we don't know to what extent hyperplasia happens universally.
Yeah.
So and some people just don't grow. There's other options for improving muscle performance, like the enzymes we talked about, blood flow, shifting the myosin form so you've got a more efficient or economical contraction. Muscle has so many levers it can pull to produce better performance and make you a better or stronger lifter in the gym, neurologically, et cetera, that you got to be really, really crafty paying attention to how you choose your stimulus, because you can actually make plenty of progress in the gym and not grow at all.
Yeah.
Just because that stimulus for you is not a hypertrophic one. You see this all the time with guys who've been training to get really, really strong, and then they have to go do high rep stuff to make progress.
Yeah.
Or train more frequently to make progress, or the other way around. Like you must have to get stronger to make progress. But I do think, like I said before, if you go from average strength to you're the strongest guy in pretty much every lift that you do in your gym, it's going to show. You may not be the biggest dude. Flex Wheeler wasn't the strongest guy in the gym, and he had one of the best physiques ever to show up on stage. But there's something to say for that relationship.
I think so too.
Yeah,
it's a good response. I knew you'd have something good for that one.
Yeah, it's a cool topic.
We had a couple more. I know we had the video we were going to do, but we kind of were running lower on time. What do you say we save that, and that'll give us something to do next time? Because we did have an interesting topic here from Nevin in Canada. He says, actually, he had a couple of them. Hold on just a second. Let me find the other one he posted. This one. Here we go. Any tips on calming the central nervous system down after training? But then he also asks, is there any reason why you wouldn't want to calm down immediately after training?
Why you wouldn't? I mean, it depends on what you have to do. If you train in the morning, you have to go to work and be on your toes and be, cognitively aware of what's going on, then you wouldn't want to calm down.
But I'll tell you what, Scott, this one kind of maybe struck something with me, because I feel like after I had gotten sick, which was now 18 months ago, that really put me into a real keyed up state where my sympathetic nervous system was just easily triggered. And I found that my ability to handle intense weight in the gym, to handle the pain of training, drastically changed overnight. My pain tolerance went down, not only physically, but mentally. And I feel a lot of that was because I was already so high strung. My sympathetic nervous system was just on the edge. And for me to kind of get back into a place where I can train successfully, I've had to be able to kind of down regulate that. So this question kind of jumped out at me, because I do feel it's really important that we are able to down regulate that. I'm thinking to myself, even if I were to go to work after that, I would want to be able to calm down. Maybe not calm down to the point where I'm going to go to sleep, you know what I mean? But calm down to the point where I'm not on edge anymore. I think to myself, if you're doing progressive overload and you're at that point where you're about to do something you've never done before, it's one of the greatest feelings in the world. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know exactly what I mean, but it's not a place where you can live your entire life. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You can't stay there, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I talked about this before. Some of the best bodybuilders in the world are kind of renowned for having pretty chill personalities. Jake Cutler's really chill guy. Dexter Jackson, you know, Ronnie Coleman.
Yeah.
Sean Roden was super chill.
Yeah.
You know? So there is sort of a chronic stress load or chronic activity that impacts your pain tolerance. Everything becomes harder if your stress otherwise is elevated. Like this is a big thing with like special forces guys and you know, SWAT guys and people who are in military, and that they may have extreme circumstances where they need to be totally on and up and ready to go, but then they need to be able to regulate themselves back down and not be, you know, freaked out unnecessarily about things.
Yeah.
Because that will impact your performance, that your cortisol levels are high unnecessarily, et cetera, et cetera.
Adrenaline, so all that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we want to know what his circumstances are. Like one thing that could be a common issue is, you know, you train it after work and you're using a pre-workout stim, you know?
Yeah.
And like, okay, so you just took 400 milligrams of caffeine at 5 o'clock. You can't go to bed at 8. I wonder why. You know, that's going to be an issue. And then in meditation or finding a way to become aware, use your own heart rate and pay attention to the biofeedback your body's giving you, you can literally bring yourself down from a highly excited state very, very quickly once you become good at doing so. So there's tons of breath work techniques can be applied.
That's what I use.
Yeah, you've had to. Yeah, because I mean, the thing that's interesting about your situation, I get it, and we talked about this, is that sort of hyper reactivity that you were living in was I think at least partly secondary to the fact that everything was so much more difficult because your breathing difficulties and the effects of having COVID on your body, long COVID on your body, means that like just walking around was like a huge exertion level was so high. So
just breathing was difficult.
Everything.
And I think that what you're talking about too, like meditation, the breathing is to me, that would be a number one thing is, and you know what I use is box breathing, which is just a simple inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. Yeah. And you can find cool little memes. Yeah, or not memes, but like little, animated pictures online to look at. And I keep one of those on my phone. And special forces, you mentioned, they do use that stuff because they can't have an adrenaline dump when they're about to like bust into a room and, you know, take everybody out or whatever. Yeah. They have to be able to stay calm. And it literally it's kind of like a hard reboot to your system. And what Victoria suggests is using that first thing in the morning. And then to basically like set your day and then to use it whenever needed. And I've done it like in the middle of work. I just like, hey, hold on a second. I need to stop and do this. And like after 2 rounds, which is literally under a minute, I'm in a different place. And it like you can feel yourself deregulate, like down-regulated.
Apple Watch reminders you can get that'll do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mine gives me a little reminder in German to take a little time, you know, and do some breath work.
And I think the first thing we always want to think of, and kind of like referencing earlier to like, you know, wanting to like, we want drugs, you know, we want like, what do I take to do this? But really it truly is like
blockers.
We can do this ourselves. We really can.
Absolutely. There are yogis that can almost get their heart to stop.
Yeah.
You know, just by learning how to control their autonomic nervous system.
I have a ton of respect for that. I don't have the patience or the interest to do that. You know what I mean? But the box breathing is like, I don't have to learn anything. I just follow the thing. You know, I just do it. You know, I follow a plan, and simple as that. 16 seconds later, I've gotten through 1 round and it's made a difference. It's like, oh, okay. It literally is like a hard reboot to the computer.
There was this is direct evidence that just stopping and freeing yourself from any outside responsibilities can massively impact your mental state. Was when I was in graduate school, graduate students are the guinea pigs for studies when they're doing like pilot work.
Yeah.
And one of our buddies was me and Chris Gregory is actually his name. We were doing this for another graduate student who wanted to measure cardiovascular drift and EPOC and some other things. He was an endurance athlete. So we had to do a ton of these either like 10 or 12 minute, maybe it was like 10 to 12 minute maximal exertion cycling bouts on a cycle ergometer. So we figured out our VO2 max and he tested that several times. And then he put the workload so that it was hard and like you couldn't go past 12 minutes. You just couldn't maintain the workload, but you could just barely get to 10. So it was like, I wouldn't say it's the same, but you know how Tom Platz would do, like he'd throw 2 1/4 on the squat bar so the lower goes, and he'd squat for 10 minutes with the kitchen timer.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. Like you get a heavy workload and you're like, oh, fuck, here we go. And it was just like, you're just going as hard as you can until you slowly, like 8 minutes, you're just grinding to a stop. These were just absolutely brutal. I mean, like a 30-second wind gate, those are hard because everything you got. This is like, it's like really, really hard at the beginning, like 8 out of 10. And then it just like gradually creeps up to 10 until eventually like, that's it, you're gone. So we had to do multiple trials of that. We had to do one where we had electrodes all over our legs to measure activity, and we had a rectal thermometer in and esophageal thermometer in. So on both ends, measuring body temperature, measuring gases at the same time. Multiple trials because he wanted to gather all this information with the same workload, the same trial. And one of the trials, he wanted to measure muscle activation with an MRI. So we went over and we did this maybe twice. I can't remember. At least twice, maybe several times, because he was just using us as the guinea pigs. He'd change some things, like, hey, you guys do it again. So we go over and we get on the bike. This is at the MRI, like it's a separate, because it's a giant magnet. So sometimes they have those separate from everything else because the magnet will fuck up all sorts of things. You can't wear any metal. If you got a pacemaker, it's a no-go. These are powerful magnets. So we get on the bike, cycle. Literally, heart rate is max. It's heart rate of 200 when I get done. And then you're done. Okay, get in the tube. Boom, you get in the tube and you lie there. And just try to just breathe easily. And it's like, whoa, oh shit, okay. Like max effort. I would be asleep in 10 minutes.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
Absolutely. They'd have to wake me up every single time.
That's crazy.
Because there's nothing to do. You just lie there and relax. Yeah. So you know how people like they do an all out, like a crazy squat? I never do this in the gym because I don't want to fall into that place of relaxation.
Yeah.
If I have anything else to do, and I just don't want to do it. Like sometimes you get a panicky effect after you finish a hard set, and I stay in that aggressive, like I'm not done yet.
Yeah.
If I ever get that, like that's a little tip for people who have that issue. Sometimes people do when you really exert yourself. But some people just lay down on the ground, and just like and they just rolling all over the place.
Yeah.
You can really very rapidly get into a relaxed place, and I wasn't trying to get in the lotus position. If we were lying in a little tube,
Yeah.
And the MRI thing, it's like it's making its noise as the magnet was going back and forth. Like there's no music, there was no intentional breath work. It was just all you got to do now is lie in the tube and don't move. Yeah. Just lie there, and just try to let your breath just do what it naturally would. Don't try to hold it. Don't try to control it.
So you're saying finding a way to basically you're saying take away any like need, basically be in the present, not worrying about, give yourself some type of moment, whether it be lying in a tube or something else where, cardio's kind of been that way for me in that I've told myself like, okay, I can't I can't be on the computer doing this. I can't be doing that. I'm going to spend this time on the treadmill. And that is a very even though I'm doing cardio, slow, steady state, it is a down-regulating thing for me because I am not worried about doing something else,
Yeah, this is so you can get in sort of a bit of a flow state, probably not technically, but like there's something about, rhythmicity. This is why rhythmic dance can be cool, or running, like people who like to run and they just like they get into a flow state and it's some sort of entrainment. That's what the breathing does too. That can function.
Yeah.
What I was talking about, is sort of more of a sensory deprivation, like you do in a float tank.
Yeah, yeah. But because I wanted to wrap it back around to you were initially saying doing something where you don't have like responsibilities that need to get done right now is what you're saying. Right. Some sort of way. that's what, like I said, what cardio becomes for me. You're in that too. You're deprived of the entire world around you. You can,
yeah. See that there's a complicating factor here with at least with training. If the cardio is not hard, then it's not a problem. But like one thing, sometimes when I train legs, you can get this massive EPOC, and so excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, and some of that is related to the sympathetic activation that you get. Sometimes if you train so hard, my heart rate, I didn't feel stressed. I come back home, but I lie there and my heart rate would just be flying. And this is not with any caffeine intake or whatever. It's just because I stressed myself so much. There's the sympathetic nervous system just has a residual elevation. And some of that is just because the epinephrine has a residual effect. So that will last for a while. But there was certainly an epinephrine release when I was doing we were doing those cycling bouts.
I bet.
And it was, and like people who take naps, I've had, occasions like when I ran my gym, for instance, I would go because when I'm in the gym, then people are always coming asking me for stuff. Either I've got clients or I've got people who work at the gym, and I would just go out into my car, turn on the air conditioner because I'm in Arizona, and just lean back, put a towel or something on my eyes, and just like take a 20-minute like little cat nap. And it was like I totally started a whole new day. It was like that, just totally checking out. I got nothing to do. I got no phone that's going to beep at me, no watch that's going to beep at me. There's nothing happening. And just free yourself that. Now imagine like you get done. It's like, okay, it's 5:50. I got to be in my car by 6 o'clock so I can be home at 6:30 because my wife's got dinner waiting for me or whatever. Right. And I got client work to do or whatever. I got, kids have a football game or whatever it might be. That doesn't give you that come down time.
Right.
And so, creating those patterns and those habits. And this is why, like, some of the best, like the guys who do extreme things, like the military guys we mentioned before, they've got a tremendous, it's just, they have control over their mental state. Probably naturally they do that. And it's probably, they've been able to build upon that through training it, working on it. And that's just can be just as much a part of being able to effectively integrate going after it in the gym into your daily schedule, as being able to going after it in the gym. Let's like you go in there and you're transformed into this whatever it needs to be. You're letting your rage in. You're having like this completely cathartic experience in the gym where you're almost shitting yourself and getting nosebleeds or what have you. And then you want to be able to turn that completely off because your recovery requires that you're able to come down.
Yeah.
So that's another skill set that can be equally as important as opposed to, like you said, like imagine if you're just like that all the time.
You couldn't be.
You're like, right? It'd be terrible to be around, and you would never recover. You'd be constantly stressed. And when people get like constantly stressed throughout their lives, you see this. I've seen this so many times. Like their body compositions just go to shit. Like
absolutely
lose muscle and gain fat at the same time. It's like, how is this happening? How is this even possible thermodynamically?
Yeah.
But it happens. So yeah, I wish we knew more about his situation to know, what's running through his head, what he's doing, because you just have to take it on a case by case basis, I think.
Yeah, and I think that everybody listening can find something to apply from this. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care what your situation is, that we can all do a better job at finding that mindfulness for a moment to be able to unplug and be able to reset. And we owe it to ourselves too, I think. Be present.
Yeah. I like to spread this little trick. I might have mentioned it here before. I mentioned it to somebody just the other day. And actually, something we mentioned John Meadows, I think, early on in the podcast. I think we were recording when I was talking about John. It's my rule of 5. It's not my rule. It's the rule. I call it the rule of 5s. And the number is sort of immaterial.
Okay.
But it's a way to be mindful and evaluate what would otherwise be a stressful situation. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. You'll figure it out sort of depending on what's going on that might potentially be stressing you. So let's say it could be an incident where someone like swerved at you on the road, or you've got a business deal that's not going the right way and there's nothing you can do. It's going to go south. So you think to yourself, and 5 is just an easy kind of number to remember. I stole this from someone. I don't know where I got it from. I wish I did. Will this matter? What's going on now that's upsetting me? Will this matter in 5 seconds, in 5 hours, 5 days, in 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years? And it's like, okay, this will matter. If it'll matter in 5 years, I should probably pay attention. Like someone's choking and they might end up dying and they won't be in my life. It's time to be able to take action and focus.
Yeah.
If it won't matter in 5 minutes, like someone swerved at you on the road and you didn't wreck your car and you didn't get hit, will it matter in 5 minutes? Like, why am I going to spend the next 5 minutes like beating on the dash and like being upset? It doesn't matter. Will it matter in 5 months? No, it won't matter in 5 months. Will it matter in five weeks? Okay. Yeah. Now I see, I should probably pay attention to it a little bit, but in 5 months, it's not that big of a deal. 5 months, I won't even know, so so you change your level of arousal, your level of concern, and, your approach by just running it through that. Yeah. I just do it in my head, like automatically now.
I like that.
Fives. Yeah, just like 5 seconds. 105 seconds. Like there's no point in being worrying about it at all, right?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
But we get upset about stuff. It's like you're walking your dogs and, the dog runs around you, and the leash kind of trips you up. And this doesn't happen to me that happens with me because I have 3 dogs. And I could be like all pissed because like I got tripped up and I blew out my flip-flop. It's like, will that matter in 5 days? No, I'll get on Amazon right now in my phone and I'll order new flip-flops and I'll have them tomorrow. It won't matter.
Yeah.
So whatever, so you can run through that, and it's so helpful to just bring you out of unnecessarily frustrating or excited states of mind, I think, at least.
That's a great way to close the show. That's a good take-home tip. Guys, we appreciate you watching. Of course, check out more from Scott. You can get his book, BYOBB Coach. That's Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach, BYOBBcoach.com. You can also go to Amazon, get the hardcover there. I'll have links for that below. Also, check out his training plan, Fortitude Training. That'll be at the website. You can check that out. Go to our sponsors, too, TrueNutrition.com. Use our code THINK. You can get some additional savings. Like I said at the beginning, if you have any questions about any of their supplements, any of their flavors, anything you're interested in trying to put together, please let me know, because I've used a lot of their stuff over the years, and I believe in all of it. I know Scott does, too. Skip does as well. We basically all have been big followers and believers of True Nutrition. Supplementsource.ca. If you're in Canada, check them out. And we've got, I didn't mention at the beginning, but we have a new sponsor for our UK people, and that's Strom Sports Nutrition. Check out stromsports.com. They've got a lot of really good health products and really good blends and stuff for health, as well as standalone products like Tutka and NAC, stuff like that. So you guys can shop with any of these companies, and it will directly help to support our programming. Plus, just know that those companies believe in what we're doing, and so that they support what we're doing here. Also, check out Patreon. Like I said, I'm going to do a live stream over there. I'll probably get Victoria to hang out with me for a little bit on that, but it'll just be like a little bit more low key, less of like the actual podcast and more of us just hanging out and chatting. So I'll be putting that together soon. Be sure if you're on Patreon to head over there and check in, ask me some questions, stuff like that. Guys, for another episode of Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson, I'm Scott McNally, and we will see you soon. Thanks a lot, Scott, as always.
Peace.